From Deadpool's wisecracks and Gambit's charm to Spawn's dark edge, and even some rare fan favorites like Madman, we're breaking down 90s comic book icons with their first appearances, current fair market pricing, highest sales, CGC census count, and our take on their role in comic book history. I'm going to share my insights with our special guest, Swaggle. So get ready to see the numbers and stories behind the legends in 90s icon Creator Spotlight. This 90s icon spotlight is brought to you by Global Comics. Want to catch up on Superboy, Spawn, Hellboy, or even Harley Quinn? You can read their stories and thousands more anytime, anywhere on Global Comics. Global Comics just made the deal in comics even better. Global Comics Gold is now $6.99 a month or $69 a year, giving you unlimited access to tens of thousands of comics from DC, IDW, Boom Studios, and more. And here's the best part. With my special code, you can lock in an even better deal at just $59.99 for your first year. If you haven't become a member yet, now's the time. Big shout out to Global Comics for supporting today's spotlight. Now let's get back to celebrating the 90s icons of comics. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to today's comic book spotlight, creator spotlight, whatever we call this show. It's a fun time. My name is Izzy. I hope you enjoy yourself as we're going to enjoy ourselves in this show. And I'm going to bring out a special guest. It's someone that's been meaning to come to the show for a while. I had conversations with him, and I want to bring him out. So let's just welcome him into the party. What's going on, Mickey, better known as Swaggle? How you doing, my man?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Izzy. This is going to be really fun and exciting. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over the course of our comic book content creation careers here. Last time we got to meet in Terrificon, which was a lot of fun. And I'm happy to be on the channel and get into this show today.
Yeah, and I'm coming fresh off of Terrificon. It was a fun weekend of good stuff. Got a chance to hang out with a couple of friends and stuff like that. I did the whole weekend. It's the first time I did the entire weekend. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, interesting. I didn't hear too much coming out of Terrificon this year. I mean, I feel like maybe it's just my sphere as far as like the people that I know attending. But, what was the general takeaways this year from you, if I can ask?
So the general takeaway for me was that there was a lot of shows going on. So we had Terrificon, which is probably the big one out of the bunch. But there was also a fan expo over in Boston that was taking some of the heat. Now, if you've ever been to a fan expo, they're very much pop culture based. There are some comic creators like Arthur Adams was there. Joe Quesada was there, he's usually a normal for a fan expo. But then there was another one that I think was called Steel City over at Pittsburgh, which is a little further out. But it's still, you're talking about 3 shows in the Northeast area taking up all the real estate. Pricing, I think, was higher than I expected for some books. And, and I think it has a lot to do with like spec or things like that, where people talk a lot. And, us, we talk a lot about spec books. I did catch that one book that I saw and I asked the price for, and I just went no, which is the West Coast Avengers 35. They were asking for 50.
Oh man, that one is just going to be marked up like crazy at any show you go to these last month or so.
And it's one of those books that it's like you go to yourself, you're like, really, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one you wait for. Just wait 3 months from now, and if you want it, pick it up then.
Yeah, so besides that, I think for the most part, because Mark Silvestri was at the show, they were asking for more money for his books, of course, because he was present. So there was a little bit of upcharging for that. I was very fortunate enough to get one of the books early. I picked it up, which was the X-Men 251, the famous crucifix cover. And that was one I got for a really good steal. Decent cover, not a near mint, but decent enough for what I needed it for. I picked that one up, and I picked up a couple of other books here and there. Some Doom covers, of course, because I like to make sure I do a little video for them. So that's how it was. But we're here talking about an era in comic books that was, I guess, what people like to refer to as oversaturation of product. It's probably a good way of looking at it. And we're going to take this time to talk about that. And we're going to be looking at 90s comics. What's your thoughts on 90s comics?
Well, as you sort of set it up, you called it oversaturation. But if I want to spin it in a positive way, I could say just very popular, high-selling, nostalgic comics for a lot of people that are still collecting today. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, this list is going to incorporate one of my all-time favorite characters, which I'm excited to talk about. But the 90s was that time, right? When everybody was, jumping into comic book collecting. There was like the explosion of, the fans coming in. I think there was record amount of comic book stores at that time. And so you have a lot of fans and a lot of nostalgia for a lot of these books, just maybe not a lot of value necessarily.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about this list here is that for the most part, with the exception of maybe a few of them, they're all really affordable keys. We're going to be looking at the 90s icons. So we're going to be looking at first appearances of the most popular characters of that time. And in some cases, they're still popular today, or they became more popular as years progressed. The one specifically I'm thinking in the top of my head. But as always, we always want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors, which is Go Collect. This list will be on their Go Collect site, and I'm going to throw my information there. I just love reading the comments from there. They're awesome. But let's get started with our honorable mentions, and that is, we got 3. The first one is Renee Montoya, who first made her appearance in Batman the Animated Series as a police officer. She didn't become a bigger character until Batman 475, and then really much, much later, and then she eventually became the Question. Anything on Renee Montoya that you could tell me?
When I saw that you had Renee Montoya on the list, it actually did give me one little memory, is that when I pulled out my comic book collection from back in the day, one of the books that I did have was her Batman first appearance,
Really?
and I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, why did I end up having it? And it's like, of course, because I was in the pipeline of watching Batman, watching the Batman animated series, picking up the comic book that was related to that. And so I just happened to have it. So when it became like a key or a spec book that everybody was talking about, say in the last couple of years or so, I was like, oh, I actually have this thing. And, I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, cool character. And I don't know too much about her current rendition, but people seem to still kind of go back to that, book as like a minor key from time to time.
Yeah, and that's why it's an honorable mention, because she became more popular much, much later in like the later aughts or 2010s when they turn her into the Question. That's really the reason for that one. Our next 2 entries are honorable mentions, not so much because of the characters, but because of the creatives behind the characters, really. And the first one we're going to look at here is Gen 13. This was created by Jim Lee and Brancho. But let's be honest, it's all about J. Scott Campbell with this one. This is where he got his big break, and just look at that right there. It only just got crazier afterwards. But any fond memories of Gen 13 and J. Scott Campbell covers?
These are probably the ones that my mom would let me buy back in the day. But I think it's cool to sort of see that he would sort of grow into the artist that he is today. And like when you go back and you look at artists' first work, like it's a cool part of the comic book history that it took place in the these Gen comics and stuff, which I have vague memories of this when I was a kid, but they were probably not ones that my parents were going to let me buy or that I had in my collection.
Yeah, with Gen 13, it was very interesting because they first made their debut in a crossover event with Valiant Comics called Death Made Black. But really where it really started getting that momentum was when you were seeing J. Scott Campbell's artwork with the book. And people, it was one of those, when we talk about spec books, if you remember Wizard magazine, this was all over Wizard. All over. Everybody wanted Gen 13 issue number 1. Everybody wanted issue 0, issue 4. And the limited series specifically was the big talking point. This is what everybody wanted. And then when they did Gen 13 number 1, the ongoing series, that's when we had a bit of a variant boom with that issue. There was like, I think 13 variants for that book. There was a very popular Janet Jackson homage cover, I remember, and some other ones. There was, I think, a Pulp Fiction one as well. But everybody wanted J. Scott Campbell's art, and he did the interiors. So that was a time then the artist also did what was inside, not just what was outside. And speaking of great artists, our next book here, really the character we're looking at is Witchblade, but what we really are talking about is the late, great Michael Turner. Michael Turner, I like to call his art style romantic, if that's a good way of putting it, because there's something elegant about the way he drew, the way his characters just came out to life, and they were just beautiful works of art. Any thoughts on Michael Turner specifically?
Yeah, no, I think you put it well. I mean, I definitely think that even though we're talking about 90s, I kind of lump 80s into this as well. But, you know, the 80s and 90s was really a place that sort of spawned a lot of, you know, just really creative, talented artists that in a lot of ways still have their huge followings today. And he was one of them.
Yeah, he's definitely one of them. Gone way too early, diagnosed with cancer, and eventually passed away. But he was one of those guys. Whenever you saw a Michael Turner cover, you had to pick it up because it was just that beautiful. And you know, it's a shame that he's gone, but his art still lives on. Want your own graded Spider-Man 2099 #1 featuring the first appearance of Miguel O'Hara? Just like this video and drop a comment telling us your favorite 90s comic book icon. The winner will get announced at our next Spotlight video. Remember, this is only for US subscribers only. So, good luck. Okay. So those are our honorable mentions. Let's get into the list. And we're going to start off with a bit of a cult hero. So one that many people may not be familiar with, but he was one of the big indie characters of the 90s. I'm referring to Madman, created by Mike Aldrin. He first made his appearance in Creatures of the ID #1. This book came out in 1990 for Caliber Comics. A high sale of this book was $2,040, and that was in 2020. The last sale of this book was $477 at a 9.8. The fair market values, the average fair market values, are $110 for very fine, $550 for a 9.8. Not that many books in the census under CGC with 272. This is the first appearance of Madman. Now, that character that you see in blue there, that's actually Madman prior to becoming Madman. He becomes Madman in issue 1 of Madman that came out in 1992. There's a character by the name of Frank Einstein, and that name is very specific. But do you have any thoughts of Madman and Mike Aldrin in general? He's a cult artist as well?
I mean, this one is a deep cut for me. You know, I wasn't too familiar with, you know, Madman and even this comic book. I mean, I've seen it around, you know, now over time, just kind of getting to know like what people like. But I just feel like a lot of the Caliber comics were, you know, didn't sell as much as like the big two. And so kind of now we're in that place where, yeah, like, you know, you can find this book out there, but 272 for a 1990 book is not that many on the census, relatively speaking. So yeah, it's a really cool book. And you know, it's got its obviously its passionate fans that really like this thing.
Yeah, he's one of those characters that he was big in the 90s. He kind of faded away, really. But it was more about, again, similar to what we talked about J. Scott Campbell and Michael Turner. It was a lot about Mike Aldridge's style, his indie style, because he's very big in the indie scene. Great guy. I've met him a few times. Madman is his baby. And the term Frank Einstein is based off of 2 of his favorite characters, Frank Sinatra and Albert Einstein. But what makes it even more interesting is when you put it together, you get Frankenstein, which is kind of the idea behind Madman. And he becomes this Frankenstein character who is a hitman and then becomes a superhero, which we're going to talk about in another character later. That's what makes this book special. So let's move on to now one that's a little more popular, and that is the man known as Cable, Nathan Summers. He made his debut in New Mutants 87 in 1990 for Marvel Comics. High sale of this book was $859 at a 9.8. That was in 2021. Last sale of this book was $37 at a no grade. The fair market value is $89 near mint, $353 at 9.8. Unlike the other book, we got over 15,432 copies in the census. I just happen to have one of them. It's the first appearance of Nathan Summers, Cable. Now we could talk about some popular characters that are out there. Cable was one of the big ones in the 90s.
Oh yeah, he was massive. I mean, I have very specific memories of being in comic book stores at the time in which this was even released, and just like going around to different shops, like trying to find a copy because it was already the book that was selling out, even at that time. And yeah, it's kind of interesting because Cable, at least in my memory, was probably at that time one of the most popular characters in Marvel. Mm-hmm. Like if you're talking about like who were their flagship, superheroes that they were rolling out with, I think Cable was kind of in it. And then, over the years, obviously he's kind of been downgraded to sort of the, what would you call them, B tier or C tier level of superhero, but had a little bit of a resurgence now because Deadpool's popular and Rob Liefeld's popular, and he was in the New Mutants the Deadpool 2 movie. So yeah, cool to see Josh Brolin do his depiction, and yeah, Cable's always been a great character.
And Cable's one of those characters that I think what made him special was the mystery behind him. He was very a la Wolverine-like in that way. There was mystery behind him. Like, you knew there was something. He was a time traveler from the future. We didn't know much about it. We knew there was some relation to the Summers. Apparently, it turns out that's Scott and Madeline's son, who made his debut in X-Men 201, which was back in the 80s. I remember that book was hot for a little while, too. Now it's like a $10 book and stuff like that.
What's funny about that, that's one of those... Sorry, that's one of those funny books that if you go back and you pull out like an old Wizard or Overstreet, like that X-Men 201 is like one of the big keys. Like I think that was one that sold for like $50 at that time, and one of the books that has gone in reverse.
It definitely has, because it's just him as a baby, and there's we then learned that he was the kid that was sent away, and turns out it was him. And there was this really cool storyline that he took New Mutants and turned them into X-Force, which was, I think, the big part of it. And as we know, X-Force #1, one of the highest selling comic books to this day, it holds a pretty tight record within the echelon of the $1 million books. So Cable's at one time, I would say, was bigger than Deadpool. And it's funny how the roles have reversed, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he was also in the X-Men animated series, so he had that as an elevated platform for him as well.
Yeah, and it was exciting when we finally got him, because I remember watching it and thinking 92, I think it was episode 6 or 7. It was around one of those episodes. That was the excitement. It was like, yo, we're going to get Cable. We're going to get Cable. We're going to get Cable. And when we got Cable, it was like, that's how we wanted our Cable. So really popular book. All about the pouches with Cable. That's what it was all about, the pouches. And I love how we handle that character. All right, our next character we're going to look at is actually a second generation character, and that is Ghost Rider. We're referring to Danny Ketch. Danny Ketch first made his appearance in Ghost Rider #1 in 1990 for Marvel Comics. This has a high sale of $576 at 9.8. That was in 2021. Last sale of this book was $125 at 9.8. Rawls goes for about $17 near mint. Graded copies on average, you got $65 for 9.6. It's 4,406 copies in the census. Danny Ketch was the second iteration of Ghost Rider, and what's interesting enough for me, and I'll let you tell me what you think, is that at this time when we are getting this second rendition of a Ghost Rider, I don't think anybody had a problem with it. It wasn't like, oh, no, that's not my Ghost Rider. Instead, it was, and we did this a lot with a couple of other characters, but I think we accepted Danny Ketch probably because that bike looks dope. So, you know what I mean? And what's your thoughts on Danny Ketch?
Yeah, I remember at the time too, to your point, like I was super excited. I definitely had this one and was collecting the Ghost Rider series as it came out. But I do wonder if that had to do with my age, where like to me, I was like, oh, cool, it's Ghost Rider, this is just a cool character. But I wonder if, say, the older LCS shop guys were like, who's this new version of Ghost Rider? Yeah, not my version. So I think we'd have to go back and ask, like the older crowd what they thought of Danny Ketch when he came out. But at the time, I thought that this book was amazing and this character was amazing. And it's funny because even at 4,000 copies, it's like a lot on the census. But like, I don't know, man. I have the worst luck with this thing. I can never find a 9.8 of this thing.
Really?
It's really hard for me for whatever reason.
Well, I will say the paper quality is pretty crappy. As you can see, the average is a 9.6. So that might be saying something. During that time, paper quality was that newsprint paper that was underneath it that would, within time, it actually will smudge inside the pages. And then, of course, the covers where they were very flimsy. These were the epitome of floppies. This is why you call them floppies back then. And this was one of those books. There's a lot. Believe it or not, there's like 4,000 copies in the census, but there's a lot of Ghost Riders #1s out there. I think I happen to have like 3 copies myself because it's just pretty cool cover. I just love the cover in general. I just like that they took the little corner box in the bottom and it was like, you know what? Let's turn it landscape just so we don't cover his foot. What I mean? So that's a great book. Another character that was huge and is still popular today, the Raging Cajun, Gambit, Remy LeBeau. He made his first appearance in X-Men Annual 14, but let's be honest, everybody wants Uncanny X-Men 266 that came out in 1990. High sale of this book is $26,351. That's because it was a 9.9 in 2021. That says a lot. However, the last sale of this book was $92 at a no grade. Raws are going for $139 near mint, $464 at a 9.8. This one has a lot in the census. Currently, 27,306 copies in the census. Another one of those, the coolest characters to come out of the X-Men.
Yeah. I mean, 27,000 copies just goes to show you how popular it is. I mean, the print count is wild, but the popularity of the character is also very high. So, just a great book. And to your point about the X-Men Annual 14, it's funny because there's people that are very passionate about that one being the first appearance. And, I think that that's true, but this is just one of those rare cases where, sure, but more people would rather buy this one or just own this one or spend more money on this one. And I think it has to do with just the cover and the fact that it's in the ongoing X-Men run versus the annual.
Absolutely agree with you. I think it's a cover appearance that makes it more desirable, right? It's a first cover. The reality of it is this was supposed to have been the first appearance.
Yes, true.
Right? It was intended to be the first appearance, but because of shipping delays, it wasn't. And the annual came out before it. The annual is a beautiful Arthur Adams cover. I'm never going to deny that. It's a beautiful Arthur Adams cover, but in comparison to this type of cover, yeah, it's uncomparable. You got to go with the one with him in the cover. He's even in the corner box, And
cover is king. Cover is king.
The cover is the king, and in this world, the CGC, 27,000 copies says a lot. So that's the thing with that character. Another popular character who's probably more popular today than he was when he first debuted. We're talking about Wade Wilson, Deadpool. He made his first appearance in New Mutants 98, as if you guys don't know that already. That came out in 1990 from Marvel Comics. This has a high sale of $4,000 and a 9.9 also in 2021. The last sale of this book was $265 and a no grade. Raws go for $307 near mint, while the graded copies also 9.6 at $422. This one has even more copies in the census with 31,562 copies. This is the first appearance of Gideon and Copycat, who was going by the name of Domino, but everybody knows about the Merc with a Mouth, Deadpool.
Yeah. Great book. Obviously, great character, very popular. He's been elevated to, S tier status at this point after his pop cultural portrayals and stuff. And we also just recently got another Ryan Reynolds tease with the logo, the Anarchy logo over the Avengers thing. So it looks like we're going to see more Deadpool in the Avengers films. And yeah, just a great character. I mean, this is one of those ones where I feel like even back at that time, uh, like Cable, it was sort of an instant hit. They sort of would shortly thereafter release the miniseries with Deadpool on it that a lot of people like to collect, and you started to sort of see Deadpool in a lot of the video games that would come out. And I noticed like he would be like a roster character. And I think that the video game stuff is actually what made him more popular. Be pre all of the movies when they were coming out. And I think that's this has just been a character that I think a lot of people, at least in my age range, have kind of, or our age range, have kind of grown with this character in terms of their popularity. And always a fun book and always one that's people want to collect.
I think, and you're correct in saying that. I think what makes him stand out is he's kind of Spider-Man without a filter. So the same wisecracking Spider-Man character, to the point that they even made him note that his costume kind of homages Spider-Man a little bit. But it's like, what if Spider-Man had no filter? What if Spider-Man was an R-rated, X-rated character? And you have Deadpool. That's pretty much where they went with. I think the bombastic style of Rob Liefeld also lent to it as well, because he's taking full ownership of all that. Even though I think the Deadpool we know and love was more of a Joe Kelly creation than what he was working on. He started it, and Joe Kelly kind of took it to the next stage.
Yeah.
And I think to this day, we are going to associate Deadpool with Ryan Reynolds, to the point that I'm curious, once Ryan Reynolds finally hangs up the Deadpool character, what's going to happen to the Deadpool character? My suspicion is that he'll stay relevant, but I don't know how relevant, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I tend to look at current comic books and what is still selling and which characters are still popular as sort of a benchmark for the likelihood of their continued success. And I think at this point, Deadpool is one of the few characters that has multiple titles and can command multiple titles and has sold ongoing. Even before we got the movies, he's been a character that's been able to do that to some success. So I think, to your point, even after the pop culture film stuff, I do think that there's enough Deadpool collectors and fans that the character is sort of grandfathered in.
Yeah, that is interesting to know. Now let's talk about a character that probably wouldn't go to most people's list, but to you, we had to add him. And that's Darkhawk. Darkhawk.
The most important character in the entire 90s.
He made his debut in 1991 with Darkhawk #1 from Marvel Comics. The high sale of this book is $432 at 9.8. Probably Swag was the one that bought that book at 2020. The last sale of this book was $5 at a no grade. Raw goes for $16 near mint, $107 for a 9.8. There are 4,547 copies in the census. Talk to me about Darkhawk, because when he came out, he was cool, but he also came out where all these other cool characters came out too, like Deadpool, like Ghost Rider, and everyone else. So what's the obsession?
Well, Darkhawk was the character that it just happened to align perfectly with my, foray into comic book collecting. I think I discovered him because they put him in a Spider-Man run that Mark Bagley was working on. Can't remember off the top of my head. ASM 347 something. There was a miniseries, Round Robin 6, and Darkhawk was a part of that. And so that's what I was reading Spider-Man at the time and went over to Darkhawk. And yeah, just a cool character. I mean, in my opinion, he is a very, I'll admit, somewhat derivative. I mean, again, another sort of Peter Parker type of high school character that sort of, it doesn't feel like he fits in, and through happenstance discovers this amulet where he gets his powers, and then all of a sudden kind of has to, deal with his personal relationships and family life and going to school, and, also being basically Iron Man mixed with Archangel mixed with Wolverine claws and Peter Parker. And that's kind of,
he had a little bit of everybody, right? With that look, and a little bit of
there's a little. Yeah, a little bit of Rom, a little bit of that. And, I have to admit, like, I think for me, just the edgelord kid in me was just like, oh, look at this character design. He looks cool. I like him. But, Darkhawk, I think, has been a character that through the years, I only found out later in life that people make fun of him. And so now I've had to kind of wear him on my sleeve as being the Darkhawk representative for all the hawk heads out there.
Now, I don't hate Darkhawk. I just never found him to be one of those characters for myself personally. I remember when he came out. I do think I have the most of the run. I think it wasn't even that many issues that it ran. I think did it go to like 18 issues or something like that, or did it go a little further than that?
It actually went to 50. It actually went to 50.
And I'm thinking of I'm thinking of a different book, but that's probably why I feel that way. But I do have my Darkhawk comic books. There is a great Venom cover with Darkhawk that I remember. Yeah. That's a great cover. I think it's issue number 8, if I'm not mistaken, that has Venom in the cover, because Mike Manley, who's the artist, was tremendous artist on this book. That I'll admit, he was a great artist. So shout out to
very interesting with this. Yeah, shout out to Darkhawk. It's very interesting with his evolution. Really quick, I'll say, like, they started him kind of like a Peter Parker, where he's sort of a street level superhero, and he interacts with the Venoms and the Hobgoblins and the Spider-Mans and all this stuff. But over time, I think they sort of realize he probably belongs in space. Let's put him with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's kind of what they've done with him more recently. But to the point of issues 1 through 50, it's issue number 50, the last one, that is the hardest to find and typically the most expensive.
And that's usually the case with these types of books. Low print runs, the last issue, everybody wants to have the last one. Here's another one that she was not a 90s icon until most recently, and I'm referring to Squirrel Girl, who I was shocked to find out that she was created in the 90s, and she was created by none other than Will Murray and Steve Ditko, out of all people. She made her first appearance in Marvel Superhero number 8 back in 1992 for Marvel Comics. Love this Eric Larson cover. High sale of this book is $8.50 at a 9.8. That was in September of 2021. Last sale of this book was $35 at a no grade. Raw goes for about $60, very fine. $263 at 9.8. It's 2,443 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Doreen Green, otherwise known as Squirrel Girl. I would have never guessed it, honestly. Never. Not in my wildest dreams.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's definitely a fun cover. Kind of reminds me of the Secret Wars cover. It's sort of like your Saturday morning cartoon vibe. Which I don't think she's on it though, right? Yeah, didn't actually make the cover.
She's on the back page because this is a wraparound, I believe.
There it is. So okay,
so it is a wraparound.
Yeah, a funny character. I mean, I feel like she's been kind of polarizing, with what they've done with her over the years. But, you showed that Marvel Rivals image in the previous slide. And I feel like her depiction in Marvel Rivals has definitely catapulted her recently to being very, very celebrated amongst a lot of collectors.
Yeah. And she's also appeared on some of the Disney Channel cartoons. So she's been like a prominent character in the Disney Channel cartoons. And she has this level of representation that I think a lot of people don't think about when they think about, Squirrel Girl. She's not like the perfect figure girl and things like that. She's just a girl. She's like a dudette, in other words. And I think that's what a lot of people like about her. She's very likable. She's a caring type character. She's more popular now than she was in the 90s. No one even talked about her in the 90s, but she made this list because of the fact that her popularity today is, and I think she's getting more popular. The day is going to come, we'll probably see her in a live action form sooner or later. If not, we'll probably definitely get more animated versions of her because that's where she's excelling. All right. Yeah. Now let's go with a team book. And this one's a fun one because we're going to talk about Youngblood. We talked a little bit about Rob Liefeld earlier. So we're going to talk about Rob Liefeld some more now. This book made its debut in 1992 for Image Comics. It was the very first Image comic. This book has a high sale of $179 at a 9.8. That was all the way back in 2018. Last sale of this book was $5 at a no grade. The Very fine is the average of this book at $6. 9.8 gold for $67. There's 1,296 copies in the census. So it's the first appearance of Youngblood, but I think what's more importantly, this launch a new imprint that we now known as Image. Image Comics, this was the book to start it all off, and it's still running today, which a lot of people said it wasn't going to. So
yeah, I mean, we recently got the new version of Youngbloods, basically, that just sort of came out, a couple of weeks ago, or even last week, I think it was. But yeah, I think to your point, with the Youngblood team, like what's even more significant about this book than just the characters themselves is, like you said, is this the fact that it's the first Image comic, and it definitely represents a big moment in comics where like the Todd McFarlanes and the Jim Lees and the Rob Liefelds and all those guys, Eric Larson and stuff, were going over and going the indie route and forming this super team label that or publishing company that would create all these titles that, yeah, maybe by today's standards they're not so popular, but certainly those artists and creators are still some of the most celebrated in the entire hobby.
Yeah, and let's see if I can remember. I don't know them all, but I do know some of the names. That Shaft in the middle. We got Vogue in purple. That's the purple girl. Chapel, Bad Rock, Die Hard, and I don't know who that other last. That's the only one I don't remember his name, but I remember their names because of how hilarious their names were. Like, you got a character named Die Hard. Come on.
I'm impressed that you know that many of the characters, because I will admit I didn't know any of them off the top of my head.
I used to draw them all the time. That's probably why. And I remember just drawing these characters. I always thought Neihard was the funniest name ever. And they were derivative characters of X-Men characters. That's all they were. They were all, when you look at Youngblood, I see X-Force all over again. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what it was then. With Youngblood specifically, I remember you said they just released it. They've released that book plenty of times. Like every 10 years is like around Liefeld's anniversary issue. I have like a special I have a big edition of the book, which was redone, remastered. They fixed the dialogue a little bit. They had a writer come in and fix the dialogue, because it's if you want a quick read, guys, pick up Youngblood #1 for $6, and you can read that sucker for less than 5 minutes. That's how fast of it. And don't even talk about backgrounds. We don't believe in backgrounds in the Image universe. So.
Yeah, this was maybe the start of fast comics right here.
Yeah, the 24-hour comics. In other words, let's go into another popular character. We're going to go into the Spider-Man universe, and we're going to bring out Carnage. Cletus Cassidy, as we now know him as. Amazing Spider-Man 361. This book came out in 1992 from Marvel Comics. This has a high sale of $1,600 at a 9.8. Also in 2021. Last sale of this book was $250 at a 9.8. We're also going for $84 near mint. Graded copies on average are 9.6 at $103. There's 330 copies. Man, I wish they would have had that one more 3. So we just had all 3s there. And as I mentioned, it is the first full appearance of Carnage, Cletus Cassidy. So my history with this book is, this is the book that came out when I did not go to the LCS that day. And the following week, it was gone. But I have a crazy copy.
This was the book that I remember being like the first book that I'm speculating on. Like I was picking up, the Darkhawk ones and all those other things, and, New Mutants 87 and 98 and all that. But this was the one where it was like, me and my dad were like, oh, let's buy like 10 copies of this thing, because this character is going to be huge. We're going to be rich one day. And this is the one that, I definitely, when I pulled out my old collection, I had like 10 plus copies of this. So I don't know. I love Carnage and this character and this time in comic books. And, say what you will about the depiction of him in the movie. I think it was still kind of cool to see Carnage. And I always get excited whenever they pull out this character for Spider-Man in current comic books still.
Yeah, because he was out there. He was just he was nuts. That was his thing. He was a true psychotic killer, and I think that was what made him so cool. Another thing that I thought was interesting at this time is we're talking about 1992. Image just formed, And I think what a lot of people were looking at with this specific character is how he is the hellspawn of Venom. In fact, it even says it in the top there, at last, the spawn of Venom. Something tells me Marvel was being cheeky and trying to do something with wordplay here when it came to it, because even in that the balloon in the bottom, the corner box in the bottom, you have a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man there celebrating his 30th anniversary. I'm thinking the editorial team in Marvel were like, come on, let's just say Hellspawn or something like that to make people think. But I think Carnage, out of all the symbiotes, Hellspawns of Venom, he is the most popular. He's clearly, to me, the best one out of all of them, because Venom always stopped at a certain point where Carnage just continued. And I think Maximum Carnage and that video game even put him on another stage. I think the movie depiction of him, I didn't hate it. I actually thought it was the right depiction. And I think Woody Harrelson was perfect. Even when we had that little teaser in the first movie and he had the hair, it was like, I want that hair. You know what I mean? Because that's how he looks in the comics. And I think with Carnage, we have a villain that Spider-Man truly fears, and it's a villain that actually would kill Spider-Man. The other villains were more like, they're just regular villains, and they're not going to go that line for the most part. Carnage did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Carnage was the key to making Venom sort of turn into the anti-hero and then later the superhero that, I think at that point they were like, we got to get this guy. He's so popular. We got to make Venom like a superhero here. And so in a lot of ways, it was great when this character came out because he got to replace the Venom version of being a villain.
Yeah. Absolutely. And now let's go ahead and move on to another character that the character itself didn't make his first appearance in this book, but it's just what he becomes, and that's War Machine. James Rhodey Rhodes first appeared in Iron Man 118 back in 1978, but he becomes War Machine in Iron Man 282 in 1992 for Marvel Comics. That has a high sale of $800 and 9.8. This one came out in July of 2021. $54 for 9.4 was the last sale. $67 near mint for the fair market value. $203 for 9.8. There's currently 4,008 copies in the census. War Machine, another one of those characters, because the 90s always did this, right? We always had to get another derivative character from another character. But War Machine was cool because it was like, let's do a muted version of Iron Man. And I love this costume, the way it looks, the way it feels, and it has its own character.
Yeah, I love this comic book. I think it's so cool looking. This is the most like kind of 90s, like let's kind of edge it up. Like you said, put them in the black and white, and then but also give it that spray paint, the pink spray paint in that type font with War Machine is just so 90s to me. And every time I see this comic, I'm just like, oh, this thing is awesome. I don't have one currently, but I need to get another one.
Yeah. It is a beautiful cover. I like the way it went, and it's like, it's an Iron Man uniform, but it's not. You instantly know it's not Iron Man. Even when Iron Man was going with the red and silver Centurion look, which personally was one of my favorite costumes because that's when I started reading Iron Man at the time. Even that felt like Iron Man. This was like, no, there's something different about this one, with the cannon in the corner. And if you ever played Marvel vs. Capcom, the best character to play is War Machine, because when you get that cheat and that cannon pops up, the opponent's dead. Forget it. It's over. Like 50 hit combo or something like that because of the cannon. So I'm all for it for this one. 282. I need to pick up a copy myself. I think I saw one, but I don't think they were asking for what I think they were supposed to ask. So I left it behind. I got other shows to come. I like my local shows are a little easier to get these books because they'll give me what you want. So there you have. And now we're going to go back to Image. Go ahead. You going to say something, Nikki?
Oh, no, I wasn't.
Okay. All right. Let's go to our next character because this one is huge today. And that is Spawn, created by Todd McFarlane. And Spawn #1, this book came out in 1992 for Image Comics. This has a high sale of $9,995 $9,995 at a 9.9. That was in December of 2021. The last sale of this book was $5 at a very good. However, the Raws are going for about $27 near mint, $123 and 9.8. This is one of the largest census counts at 36,454 copies in the census. There's the first appearance of Al Simmons, otherwise known as Spawn.
I mean, what can you say other than Todd McFarlane just coming out, creating probably the biggest indie superhero I think there is? Can you think of another superhero that is not Marvel or DC that is as big as Spawn, at least as far as a household name? And yeah, this was the one that I remember this one too, right around the time with, the Carnage. I mentioned that was the first one that I spec'd on, but I don't know what came out first. This was also another one that me and my dad were like, oh, we're buying like 10 copies of this thing because this character is going to be huge. And I think everyone else had that idea as well, as you guys can see from the 36,000 CGC census, comics that are out there. But, to this day, people still love this character. People still are passionate Spawn collectors. I mean, anytime there's like a key Spawn issue outside of #1, those things go crazy. People just absolutely eat that stuff up. And so I think it just is a testament to the badassness of the character, the popularity of Todd McFarlane, and even the movie that we got actually in the 90s, which I really enjoyed when I was a kid.
It's a fun movie. John Leguizamo was great in that movie too. So
yeah.
One of the things I will say about the Spawn character and McFarlane in general is that the prices of Spawn books, with the exception of this one, because of the high print count, there's literally millions of copies that are out there. They maintain their value. Even if there's a slight dip, it still maintains its value. That's how important Spawn is. There is a Spawn fan base, in the same respect as there is a Spider-Man fan base or there's a Batman fan base. Spawn just happens to be that character that I think this is one of those books that everybody's gonna have to have a copy soon. If you're a collector, you should have a copy. That's probably one of those things that people tell you. There's certain books you have to have. You have to have X-Men 1, you have to have X-Force 1, and you got to have Spawn #1. Those are the 3 books that any collector will tell you have to own, and they're all affordable keys. And this one specifically is so important because, again, you have great art, so story, to be honest. It's not too bad. But then the colors, they did spend the time to make this look great. And Ken, shout out to Ken Stacy who did the colors for this. Even looking at it now, this looks like a cover that could come out any day in the shelves. It feels that current to me. That's how it looks. Yeah. And that's how good this cover is. So let's stay to our Image books, and we're going to go with another character that not as popular as Spawn, but I think he does have his fan base, and he's still rolling to this day, and that's Savage Dragon. This is an Erik Larsen classic. He made his first appearance in Savage Dragon #1 in 1992 for Image Comics. High sale of this book's $150 at 9.8. That was in 2021. Last sale was $5 at a no grade, $6 at a very fine, $58 at a 9.8. 1,377 copies in the census. This is the first full appearance of Savage Dragon. He's actually made some appearances prior to that, but we count this as the first full appearance of Savage Dragon. He's a character that to this day still exists. They're still Erik Larsen is still cranking up Savage Dragon books. It's his baby. It's, he gets political at times with the character. There was an animated series. Did you ever get a chance to see the animated series?
I actually did not.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It wasn't too bad. It made 2 seasons. So it did have an animated series. I know, like all the other ones, I think Youngblood they did something, but it never came to fruition. Spawn, definitely, we know about the Spawn animated series, but Savage Dragon was an animated series. I think it came out in the USA Network. It was one of those Sunday morning cartoons. and it was fun to watch because he's just a, besides the fact that he has a green fin, he's just a Chicago cop. That's all he was. There wasn't really anything special other than that.
Yeah, this is a really fun character. I remember having this one as well, picking up all the Image, number ones at that time. And to your point, like not on the level of Spawn, but one that has survived. Rest in peace to Shadowhawk and characters like that. But I think Savage Dragon is really cool, and I like that you brought up the part with the art for Todd McFarlane's Spawn, and I'll piggyback off of that with this one here. I do feel like these Image comic books, at least most of them, definitely were a notch above what was going on with Marvel and DC at the time. And yeah, when you flip through the interiors of like Spawn 1, this one, like Pit number 1 as well is another one that I just remember, like the colors, the paper quality, the printing, it felt like a new age of comics. And I think that was another testament to like Image publishing, just doing cool stuff at that time. And even as a kid, I was like, this seems higher quality, maybe not higher quality storytelling, because I wasn't really focused on the writing, but at least the pictures, it was really awesome. And this was definitely one of those for me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we didn't get from the Image boom, there weren't any writers that went with them. So it was all artists.
That's true.
And they only had Brandon Cho, who really was, Jim Lee's friend. And he was like, come on, write this for us. And, and I think for what it was, I think the importance of Image was really the fact that, you can do this without the big two. I think Image today is definitely in a better place now as a result. I think comic books in general are in a better place now than they ever were. In the 90s was a time period where we had a lot of printing was happening, but it was also a special time because people were getting into comic books in ways that people weren't getting into comics. And that's what makes the 90s such a special time period for comic books in general. Savage Dragon just happens to be one of those characters. Eric Larson is also known as the man that always follows Todd McFarlane. So just like Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, just like Spider-Man, he also followed Todd McFarlane when this book came out after Spawn. But I think what was really cool about Savage Dragon is that even to this day, this book is still running like Spawn as well. And Eric Larson is still cranking up pages of each book. So he may take a little hiatuses here and there, but the book is still running to this day. That's a testament to Eric Larson. Mm-hmm. Our next book, again, we're going to stick to Image. This one to me was all about that theme song, and that's WildC.A.T.S. There was a WildC.A.T.S animated series that ran on CBS, and they had this theme song called WildC.A.T.S. They made their debut in WildC.A.T.S #1 in 1992, also from Image Comics. High sale of this book is $860 at 9.9. That was in 2023. Last sale of this book was $7 fine, $10 very fine for the raws, $49 at 9.8 is the average, 2,452 copies in the census. Its first appearance of WildC.A.T.S. This is all about Jim Lee. Let's see. I remember some of their names: Spartan, Grifter, Zealot, Voodoo, Riptide, Void, and Maul. Yes, I did it.
Wow. Impressive. Impressive. Yeah, this is another one, just again, that whole batch of Image Comics and teams and stuff. And, I didn't really get on the WildC.A.T.S or Youngbloods train, but, to what we were talking about with the Youngbloods thing, it definitely just felt like, yeah, these are these guys doing their New Mutants and X-Men teams, but we're just going to bring it over to Image. And kind of generic versions of the characters, but people like them, so it's always fun and nostalgic, to go back and look at these guys.
And to be honest with you, that's kind of what did it, right? The fact that when you see these characters, they're the X-Men. Like, you look at Zealot, that's obviously Storm. You look at Grifter, that's pretty much Gambit. Riptide is pretty much a version of a Wolverine. Voodoo is Psylocke. It's there. It's right there. There may not 100%. Be mutants, but they look just like the mutants. And, they're an alien-human hybrid that's in a battle against the Damianites. I love how 80s WildC.A.T.S really is, right? So it has that very Thundercats, G.I. Joe, Transformers, good versus evil type of thing, but set in the 90s, which I thought was awesome. And that's why it blended well as an animated series. Unfortunately, during the time that animated cartoons were going away from Saturday morning cartoons. But I do remember that animated series. I watched it, and that theme song was great. We talk about the X-Men theme song a lot, but man, that WildC.A.T.S theme song was awesome. Yeah. We're going back to Marvel, and we're going back to a very special character who, at the time, people loved it, and they still love it, and that's Spidey 2099. Spider-Man 2099, Miguel O'Hara, created by Peter David and Rick Leonardi. He made his first appearance in Spider-Man 2099 #1. We're not going to be talking about that other issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which is kind of like a preview, but it's a preview of this book. High sale of this book is $3,550 at a 9.9. That was in 2021. There's a lot of copies of this book, so therefore the last sale of this book was $5 near mint, $14 at a raw is the fair market value, $94 at 9.8. There's 11,782 copies in the census. I thought when Marvel came up with this 29 series, which is kind of like a precursor to what the Ultimate Universe would eventually be like, I think there was something special about 2099 that we keep coming back to it. But I think this character design for a Spider-Man character, at first glance, you look at it, it was like, okay, he's a little different, but he still feels like Spider-Man. And they hit it. They hit a home run with this character.
Yeah, I definitely think they did. And I agree with you. The 2099 stuff was really fun when it was coming out. And I remember having this one and the X-Men 2099 and some of the other ones and kind of enjoying it, as sort of I wasn't sure if it was canon or if it was sort of like a what if type of universe, but they were a lot of fun at the time. And, shout out to the foil collectors. This is always a cool book to see. It's got that Venom Lethal Protector sort of vibe. And yeah, I liked Spider-Man 2099 a lot more than Ben Reilly, so as far as like the new Spider-Man characters were coming out, I was like, I like this guy more.
Yeah. And I love the fact that when Peter David created the character with Rick Leonardi, they named him Miguel O'Hara. Like, you just had to go there. You had to get the guy to be Spanish and Irish. You couldn't just let it be one. He had to be both. But it was just so cool reading it. It was cyberpunk as well. The art style fit. I'm trying to remember the name of the corporation that was part of it. I can't remember off the top of my head. I remember there was a corporation. This whole story evolved it, and now he's part of the bigger Spider-Verse universe, which I guess you could say he started Spider-Verse. He's the first Spider-Verse character that came out of this whole thing. So he's kind of now canon in that way. But I've always loved Spider-Man 2099. I got my copy. I do happen to have a copy here right now in front of me. There it is. That I do plan on giving it away. So we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But we are going to give this one away to one of you, the viewers of this show. Let's move on and let's talk a little bit about the character who came out and everybody was excited for, and everybody was talking about it outside of comic books, and that's a character by the name of Doomsday, not to be mistaken for Avengers Doomsday. I feel like they missed out on that one. He made his debut in Superman, the Man of Steel, issue number 18. This was in 1992 for DC Comics. High sale of this book was $3,480 at 9.9, and that was in January of 2025, this year. $8 at a no grade is the last recorded sale. $12 for near mints. $98 for 9.8s. There's currently 5,631 copies in the census. Doomsday, to me, is one of those characters that was created just for the sake of doing what was known as the impossible, and that's killing Superman.
Yeah. I mean, huge event, huge moment in comic books, probably one of the most historical moments in comic books for a lot of reasons. But yeah, this character leading up to the death of Superman, which, was that probably the biggest news story, I think, in all of comic book history? I think it might have been. I remember like seeing.
It was big. It was huge.
Yeah, like every channel 2, network was covering it. Death of Superman, lines out the door, and all thanks to this character here, which was a big deal at the time for sure.
Yeah. Like when we talk about Superman 75, which is the death of Superman, which also happens to be the death of Doomsday. Let's not forget that.
It's true.
What I liked about the story was, first of all, it was Jerry Orwell's idea. And as the story goes, Louise Simonson tells the story where they were at their summit meeting to talk about the next couple of issues of Superman, because they were part of this they were part of like this little pocket universe within the DC universe, and they were connected. All the issues were connected because at this time there was 4 Superman titles, and every year they would go off and they would say something like, what we're going to do, we're going to get Lois and Clark married. Well, they're not going to do that because at that time, the Lois and Clark show was on, and they wanted to eventually get married in the TV show. So they wanted to hold off on that one. So it was Jerry Orwell that just said, screw it, let's kill him. And at that specific time, they that was something that he always said in every summit. But at this time, they actually said, you know what, let's make this happen. Because Superman was a dull character. A lot of people didn't know how to write him properly. And he was always considered the ultimate Boy Scout. And one thing that was popular about the 90s and, from the 80s going on to the 90s, we just came off of Dark Knight Returns. Wolverine was popular. Punisher was popular. Dark characters were popular. And Superman was like the exact opposite of that. And it was at that moment is when they said, let's just kill him off and let's make people care. And those of us in the comic book spirits, we kind of knew this was happening. This actually wasn't the first time they killed Superman, but this was the one that it made broadcast news. I remember the day very clearly going to my newsstand where I usually picked up comic books, and there were lines forming outside of the newsstands of everyday people buying comic books. And I remember watching the TV news, and the weatherman was wearing the armband, and they were talking about it. And I remember one lady specifically said, this is going to be the comic that will put my kids through college. And as the rest of us were like, no, it's not. But it was an important moment in comic book history. It's something that people took notice. Comic book shop made a lot of money that week. So,
yeah. And now we have that event to thank for all of the times that Marvel and DC continue to do these stories where they kill their characters. They're like, how do we get a shot in the arm for sales? Let's do a death series,
or let's just kill off a character only to bring them back within 3 months. Yep. I think the Miss Marvel is the most notorious one right now. It's like, really, you couldn't just let her just be dead for a little while longer, but. We could talk about that in another time. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about a character that is also an Image character, but I think he went beyond Image as in MTV animated series. And we're talking about Sam Kief's The Maxx. That came out in a book called Darker Image #1 that came out in 1993 for Image Comics. This has a high sale of $338 and 9.8. That was in 2020. The last sale of this book was at 8.5, and believe it or not, a slab for $9. Would you believe that? $3 near mint for the raw, $36 for 9.8. There's currently 1,170 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Maxx, who we're going to talk about more. It's also the first appearance of Deathblow, a Jim Lee creation, and Blood Wolf, which is also a Rob Liefeld creation. What's important to know about this book, and I mentioned this before, Darker Image was supposed to be a 4-issue limited series. It never got past issue 1. People are still waiting for the other 3 issues. There is an earlier version of the Maxx, which is known as Maxx the Hare, which was in Comical Primer in issue #5. That goes all the way back to 1983. I found that out. I was like, really interesting. But the Maxx became popular because of an animated series that was in MTV, which I was excited for. It was very much like the 60s Marvel cartoons where they took stills of the comic book and they kind of just moved them a little bit, but it was hugely popular during this time.
Yeah. Well, the Maxx, I mean, I'm not a Maxx lore buff, so I can't really speak too much to his character and story, but I will say that the character design is just definitely iconic at this point. I mean, just anywhere you go, I think a lot of people just see that character and they say, yeah, the purple Hulk looking thing, that is just become definitely iconic in the indie space and the image comic space. And there's just a lot of people that love this guy. And yeah, maybe one day we're going to get Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Keith to team up and deliver us the rest of the Darker Image issues.
So I did have a conversation years ago with Jim Valentino, who at the time he was serving as kind of like an editor-in-chief to the group. And I brought it up. I said, when are we going to get Darker Image 2? And he said, he put his head down. He was like, because I think Darker Image is the example of the problems that were happening within Image. I think this was the time that Image really was showing the cracks in their foundation, where there was this overall excitement to crank out product, but they just couldn't get it in time. And if you look back, and this is how Jim Valentino put it out, the books that had solo characters, they were coming out. It was the team books that weren't coming out. And he's right. It was like Spawn had its run, Savage Dragon had its runs, Shadowhawk. It was the books that were the team books that were not performing. So that says a lot about the team books at that time, but it also says a lot about really the maturity of a lot of these artists at that time. They were not businessmen at the time. They may have a little bit of business acumen to the point that they were able to survive, but they were just overall excited. They did something that was important, and they did something that we're all thankful that they did it. They had to learn from their mistakes as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to Superman talk, but let's talk about Superman dies. We do what's called a funeral for a friend storyline, and there's actually some really powerful storylines. There's one specific with Supergirl. But once the funeral was over, we have what's called the reign of Supermen, the Eradicator. Don't call him Superboy, Connor Kent, Steel, and Cyborg Superman. They all made their first appearance in Adventures of Superman 500 that came out in 1993 for DC Comics. High sale of this book is $110 at 9.8. That was in 2022. Last sale of this book was $3 at a no grade. $13 near mint is the fair market value. $65 for 9.8. 1,908 copies in the census. This is their first appearance. This book is, again, very printed. A lot of people thought Superman was coming back. It was even hinted in the covers. Turns out we ended up getting those 4 characters. And it was interesting enough. I think they sold it that one of them was actually Superman. And it turns out, spoiler alert, none of them were. If I remember.
Yeah, this was one of the ones that was funny is like when this came out, I remember thinking, I want to know what happens, but I'm not going to rip open my Polybags comic book. So I just sat on it for many, many years until I probably just didn't care anymore. And then years later, when I decided, hey, let me go back and read the story. But a lot of, Superman verse, as we would call it, much like the Spider-Verse of a lot of offshoot of Superman characters. And I always definitely enjoyed the Steel character. And actually there was an original art of his Jesco comic card that went on sale. I remember they had trading cards for a lot of these characters that came out at the time. And I almost bought that thing, but I didn't.
Really? Yeah, I loved it. And I was really on top of all the books, right? Because each character, remember I told you there was 4 titles. Each character ended up in one of those titles. The least popular was probably the Eradicator, but he was the closest thing to being actually Superman from what I remember. It was like his body or something like that, but he was like a dark version of Superman. And they all kind of like had something of Superman, where Cyborg Superman had a little bit of his memory. Everyone knew that John Henry Irons wasn't Superman. He was Steel. But it was his heart. It was all about his heart. And Superboy was obviously, we find out he ended up being a clone of Superman. And I always love that he's like, I'm Superman, I ain't Superboy. Don't call me Superboy. And he probably was one of the most popular of the bunch. However, when we find out that Cyborg was actually a villain, I think that's when the story really ended up becoming cool and fun to read. And then we eventually did get, Kal-El's return in that nice sleek black costume with the silver logo and the mullet that he had for a long time. He had it for several years, that mullet. I kind of like it. I dig the mullet. I would love to see that in live action. We kind of did, but we kind of didn't at the same time.
We get Henry Cavill playing that version in the James Gunn universe.
Well, he did it in the Zack Snyder verse that they actually put him in the costume. He just didn't have the mullet.
True.
I would have done it. I would have given him the mullet. I would have been like, damn it, he's getting the whole treatment.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with another indie darling. This one, he's very popular. If Spawn is number one, I gotta say he's a very close second. I'm talking about Hellboy, a creation of Mike Mignola. He made his surprise first appearance in San Diego Comic-Con Comics, issue number 2 in 1993. This book is from Dark Horse Comics. High sell of this book is $900 at 9.8. That was in 2002. $300 for a 9.6 is the last sale. This book raw goes for about $275 near mint. $439 at 9.8 is the average. 1,238 copies in the census. This is one of those, what's up with that cover? We want some Hellboy. But Hellboy, as I mentioned just earlier, I think he's almost as popular as Spawn.
I think he's up there. I'd say in terms of notoriety, he's probably right next to Spawn. I mentioned, what other superheroes are popular or indie, but yeah, I guess he'd be a good nomination as well. And yeah, a fun, cool book, part of comic history in that belongs to the, biggest Comic-Con crossover title here in San Diego Comic-Con. And I think that this is when a lot of strange and eclectic appearances start to get fun for a lot of comic book collectors, because even though there's 1,200 on the census, it's kind of unique, a lot of these types of books, and it kind of makes it, I don't know, more mysterious that his first appearance took place in a strange, oddball thing like this.
Yeah, and a lot of people mention Next Men, the John Byrne cover, where he's in the cover, which a lot of people refer to. For a very long time, many people referred to that as being the actual first appearance, but it ended up being this one when I was doing my research. I do remember doing my research, knowing about this comic book. There's actually even earlier renditions of Hellboy, but they were more like prototypes instead of the Hellboy that we know. So those don't really count. This is where you see the definitive Hellboy. It's a black and white story in the book, and then we get Hellboy in color in Next Men, and that's where he ends up being a very popular. We have 3 movies that have already came out. Well, 4 movies if you count the one that just recently came out. So he has 4 movies. Ron Perlman did the character brilliantly, and there's definitely some animated films. He's one of those characters that I think sooner or later we're gonna get another Hellboy, and I think Hellboy he's just like Spawn. He's just gonna outlive. He's gonna live his creators, which I think that's what the creators want. All right.
Yeah.
Talking about a character that debuted in an animated form, it's Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn made her debut in Batman the Animated Series, and it was actually a Batman the Animated Series comic book is where she actually made her first appearance in Batman Adventures, issue number 12. This book came out in 1993 for DC Comics. High sale of this book is $4,295 at 9.8, and that was 2021. The last sale of this book was $1 short of $1,000. And that was at a near mint plus. I never get it when they say near mint plus. Just say near mint. Forget the plus. Ross goes for about $438. $808 at a 9.6 is the average. There's currently 10,310 copies in the census. The first appearance of one Harley Quinzel. And it was done in a comic book that was about the cartoon.
One of the greatest cartoons ever made. I think the Batman animated series is just legendary, and I think Harley Quinn was a cool character. And it is really interesting and cool how it's that usually, the comic book character is the first place that we see them, and then they go on to be adapted into other, mediums. And this one kind of took the reverse. And there's still a lot of people though that love this character, and it's a good thing that they adapted her into a comic book, because I feel like she's probably one of DC's most important characters. Even beyond just being in Batman.
Well, she, outside of the Trinity, she might be number 4. More so than a Green Lantern, more so than a Flash. That's how popular she is, because she is popular amongst a female audience as well, that's what they got going. We don't have a lot of female representation in comics. Let's be honest, it's a fact. But I think what's really interesting enough is that it is a creation from an animated series, which people love to this day. I still watch that from time and time again. I'll go back and watch an episode too. Personally, I am a huge fan of the movies. The one I really love is the Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. I think that is by far one of the best animated movies ever. I like that she was based off of Arlene Sorkin. That's her name, is an actress. And there was an episode of Days of Our Lives where she's dressed as this clown. And as you watch that episode, it's Harley Quinn. And she ended up being the first voice of Harley Quinn. And I think that was a nice homage, paying tribute to his friend. But little did he know, Paul Tini and Bruce Timm didn't know, you're about to create an icon. She's like Deadpool and Harley Quinn. Those two go hand in hand in that weird way. I don't think they knew that, but because originally their thought process was that we're just creating this as some fun stuff. She ended up becoming very popular, and then she evolved to something else, which I think is really cool, because everybody loves the One Piece, but as you saw from the previous image, she became something completely different. And today, people love her, and whatever iteration of her is still loved to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think her, Deadpool, and Venom, all of them, kind of getting their start as sort of villainous characters into anti-heroes, and just too popular to not make, iconic characters within each publishing company.
Yeah. Let's go on and talk about someone that you actually mentioned earlier. We're talking about the Clone Saga, baby, with Scarlet Spider, Ben Reilly. He made his debut a long time ago in Amazing Spider-Man 149 in 1975, but really he was introduced in Web of Spider-Man 118 in 1994. High sale of this book is $1,250 at 9.8. That was in 2023. Last sale of this book is $45 at 8.5. Raws are going for $53, while the graded copies at 9.6 go for $118. There's 3,142 copies in the census. Oh man, that Clone Saga, that was rough to read all those years. But out of it,
go ahead.
No, out of it, we got the sweater, the cutoff sweater.
I don't mind his character design. I actually think it's kind of fun. Maybe I just have gotten used to it now, and I kind of like it for its cheekiness. But this is around the time. I'm not going to say it was this comic book or this character, but this was around the time when I started to fall off of comic book collecting and reading and stuff, and started to go into other hobbies. So I won't say that I don't like Scarlet Spider, Ben Reilly, but I wasn't collecting as much in 94, 95.
I will agree. I was collecting. It didn't stop me from collecting, but what it did do was it was one of those stories. We know how we like story arcs and things like that. Like we look at the Phoenix Saga, and the Phoenix Saga took approximately about 3 years in general, the whole saga, right? But there was slow progression to that saga. You think about other sagas like that. When you think about the Clone Saga, as I remember, it was the one saga that we like, can't we just get this over with? Can't this be over? Can't we just finish and move on with our lives with this story? It was a cool concept. He comes back. He never really died. But please finish this already. And I think that's what it was. It was a story that just couldn't find its ending. And then when it tried to make its ending, they jumped the shark, as they said, right? In which they made Ben Reilly Peter Parker. They said, no, he's Peter Parker. Kind of because they wanted to freshen him up. But in reality, it was like, say, so what you're saying, we just read 30 years of comic books for nothing? Or we read, I think it was like 15 years of comic books that meant nothing. That was never really Peter Parker. And then they had to course correct again. And that's where this Clone Saga ended up being a thing. And I think there's a special place for Scarlet Spider to the point that even in the animated movie, they did a fantastic job getting Andy Samberg to do the voice of him. And he was always brooding. There's always rain in his background or something like that. He is definitely the epitome of what the 90s were. That's what I will say.
Yeah. I think that, as you bring that up, there's been always, I'm sure, passionate fans that didn't like certain stories and all that. But maybe we can credit the Clone Saga with the very first time in comic history that would lead to many other times in comic history that people would be, can we please just end this story with Spider-Man going on right now and go on to something next?
They couldn't. They just didn't know how to end it. It was just so funny. I don't even know how long the Clone Saga actually took, but everybody else was like, "Please finish this already." But there you have it, Scarlet Spider. Let's go to our very last character, and that is the Darkness, created by Mark Silvestri. The Darkness was a very interesting character, and he was very popular at the time. He was created by Mark Silvestri and Garth Ennis, who you know from The Boys, Preacher, and some other popular comics. He also did The Punisher. This book came out in 1996 for Image Comics. This has a high sale of $53.09.8. That was this year, not that long ago, just a couple of months ago. $5 at a very fine was the last sale of this book. It's also the raw price for the fair market value. $53 is the price for 9.8. 358 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Jackie Estacado, and it's about a mob hitman who develops the supernatural forces of the Darkness. This book is interesting. This character is interesting because it spawned out of a video game. And there was a very popular video game called The Darkness. It was extremely popular. However, the Darkness in itself, he's a character that I think he keeps trying to come back, but can't seem to find his way back. But do you remember anything about the Darkness in general?
This was definitely, not my time in comic collecting anymore. And but I think it's interesting. As I look back on these sort of mid to late 90s era of comic books, I feel like they sort of have their own vibe to them, like the Silvestri style, this kind of artwork here, it's almost like a continuation of, the Spawn creations and all that stuff. And so, I think now when people go back and they look at it, there's some interesting, cool characters and cool stuff going on in this. It just, I don't know. I personally don't have much nostalgia for the Darkness.
Yeah. And I think what made him popular was the video game. The video game was huge when it came out. I remember people playing it like crazy. He's kind of like your anti-hero character because Garth Ennis did the writing. And if you ever read, and I'm sure you've read Garth Ennis writing, this is early Garth Ennis. He's notorious for The Punisher, The Boys, as I mentioned before, but he was never really much into superhero comics. This was more of a supernatural type of thing. And the Darkness has his place in history. He was tied to the Witchblade, and Michael Turner was part of it as well. But like where the Witchblade had Michael Turner, the Darkness had Mark Silvestri, and they would constantly do little crossovers here and there. So there was like this battle between the two. But he is 90s at its best. So that's the list, guys. What do you think? How do you like this list? Let me know in the comments your thoughts. Which characters you like? And before we even go, man, Swaggle, that was fun.
It was a lot of fun, going back down memory lane, checking out all these great characters from the 90s. A lot of fun memories with all of them. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to, pick up some of these books and collect them even today.
Yeah, I love picking them up because, again, like we said, because there was an oversaturation and abundance of books, they're pretty affordable keys. That last book you just saw, you could get a 9.8 under $50. So if you guys ever want to hunt down these books, it's definitely affordable. You can hunt them down. You'll probably be spending less than $100 on raw copies, with the exception of maybe a few of them. But either way, man, I love those books, and it was a special time. I have boxes upon boxes of 90s comic books that are all dollar bin books. But it is great looking back at these characters. And again, a lot of these characters stood the test of time. So with that said, Mickey, let the world know where they could find you.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a YouTube channel called Swaggle. I try to put out a few videos a week talking about all things going on in comic book and collecting news, whether it be modern stuff or vintage news or anything that's in the comic book zeitgeist. And if you guys want to check out some of my videos, you can head over there and go check them out.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mickey. We'll see you next time. We'll be doing some more stuff, more trending videos. We'll get some more spotlights. We'll see what's going on. We'll have to eventually do 80s next. So that's going to be coming down the pipe soon, and some more stuff. Until then, I'll see you. Excelsior. What's going on, everybody? Izzy here, and we are about to do our drawing for the free X-Men sketch. You're going to win a sketch by me of your favorite mutant X-Men character, whoever you want, for this comic book. All you had to do was leave a comment in the video, and for those of you who did, we have 37 comments that were there. For those of you who did, this is your opportunity to win that sketch. Please let me know who you want, and at the same time where I could send this sketch, because I will get started with this sketch this week. So let's go ahead and find out today's winner. It is none other than Dale of Suspense, and his favorite X-Men mutant is X-23 and Magic, two kick-ass characters. Well, you're only going to get one of them, but let me know which character you want, Dale, in the comments. Send it to me via IG, and I will get on with it as soon as possible. Again, congratulations to Dale of Suspense for winning the X-Men sketch comic book. Stay tuned to next week to find out who's the winner of our next prize. And Excelsior. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more comic content. Check out these other videos for even more insight. And I'll see you at the next one. Excelsior.